So I can see it on YouTube. Even now on YouTube.
Yeah, we
God.
were public, but not recorded.
It's not the first or the last time. Let's forget an evil.
I like this guy. For sure.
You guys hear us now? You good? Okay, good.
They can hear me?
Yeah.
You're good.
And
Yeah,
then we're
I
live
can
on YouTube.
So just trying to give you a quick, just credentialing. I started my telecom career back just a little bit after the divestiture of Judge Green in the early 90s, and was involved with setting up a lot of the internet in different states across the country. As time went on, I worked a lot with fiber optics, of course, as a medium to get there. And so back in 2002, 2001, there were a lot of different Utah entities getting prepared to do some fiber optic ventures, namely iProvo, Spanish FARC, American FARC. I say that in jest, I probably shouldn't, but then of course Utopia. And so they would ask me some questions periodically about what to do. In fact, I remember coming over one time and helping them. They asked for some help. And I remember that they were not happy with what I told them, and they didn't do it. and they sent it back away. So in 2008, with Utopia at about $280 million in debt, and they were on their deathbed, they came asking if I would help them. And as I looked at the situation, I determined that they needed to refinance, put it all together, and go forward. And so I was helping them when they asked me if I wouldn't come over and actually act as their CEO or their executive director. And at the time I was in a position where I had just done some other things business-wise. And so I was in the ability to do that. And so we came over, and I'm going to walk you through that story just a little bit, because I think it probably sets the stage for what we need to talk about today. So if you'll bear with me briefly, I'm going to get on the board and outline a few things for you. And then the purpose of it's not to tell you my life story, but I do think that it kind of is a foundation for most of what we're going to do. I would say in the country right now, most successful models that are municipal models that are fiber optic, I've had something to do with them outside of some North Carolina and Washington state operations. I also worked with the White House under the Obama administration to do the, and helped, was the founding founder of the US Ignite program and the Genie programs. And so those things I did along the way as well. So let me know if you can't hear me, if I need to talk louder or softer.
You might have to write big, tell us.
If it's okay, I'll come over here. So when we got to Utopia, and they were 200, just to say 250 million.
Can I just comment real quick? That's going to have to be a lot darker in order for us to see that on the whiteboard. Like, I don't know about you, Steve and Kevin and Mayor, but I can't really see what he's writing at all. That's better. That's better.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So basically what we did is we combined and refinanced debt from a rural utility service and a Department of Agriculture loan, other debts that they had, and combined it. But when we did, what we discovered, what I found out, is that I had about 8.7 million left. And so I think that they thought that was going to be enough money to do what we needed to do, but 8.7 million wasn't enough. We only had one full-time employee. We had problems with the union. We were in a mess. Our network was a mess. And so I was in charge of that. What I had done most of my life was build business models. And so I needed to know what to do. So I went to Tremonton Because in Tremonton, the Utopia had borrowed a lot of money, and the Rural Utility Service had pulled back that loan midway. It'd be very akin to you, I'm talking loud, so if I'm talking too loud, no, you're good. So it'd be kind of akin to you having a house loan that was approved by the bank. You get halfway in and you get, you're overextended because you're building, and then the loan, they take back the loan and the commitment of it, right? And so, what do? And so ultimately we won a lawsuit against the Rural Utility Service for $17 million. But the damages were probably 3 times that. But in doing so, because Tremonton was one of the, as you know, Utopia is an interlocal that's like UAMPS. It's set up as an organization, a quasi-government organization that has, the way it's set up is with weighted votes. And so depending on your population, that is your financial obligation, and that's how the bond was structured. But with their Rural Utility Service loan that they had, they could only go to rural locations. And so Tremonton was at 96% built out. And so I used Tremonton as the initial foray to try to go get us, first of all, I had to hire staff. We had to get everything ready to go. And we needed to go up and prove that we could actually be in business. We needed to replace switches and get things going. But the biggest thing that we needed to establish was there a demand? So as we went into Tremonton and got prepared, we were able to establish that there was, in fact, a demand, and started building a business case around that demand. Once Tremonton was done, and I looked around, I saw that Brigham City was about 38% built. But now, with a burn rate of losing about $1 million a month at times, we didn't have a long route in front of us. And so we couldn't even stay in business. And so we needed to figure out what to do in Brigham City. And so I wasn't a city or wasn't really familiar with municipalities at the time. So I was reading, and there was something they called an SAA, or a special assessment area. You guys probably know those a lot, and you may do them in sometimes your special improvement districts. But I noted that this special assessment area capability allowed citizens to actually volunteer. So on a voluntary basis, enter into a special assessment for whatever specific purpose. And so I asked the question, if I put together an SAA and it was voluntary, would that work, and at what percentage? I was told that I was crazy, number one, because we had to put transitory voluntary liens on people's homes, or they had to pay $3,000 up front. But they said if I could hit a third of the city to pre-sign transitory liens or pay up front on their homes, that we could bond against them. So we went to work. And at the end of the day, we were able to sign up a third of the city, and then therefore do the SAA. And so we were able to build demand and continue the business model. Today, if you've done any of your research on municipality, you'll see that they talk about Ammon a lot, and the Ammon model. It's not really the Ammon model. Ammon folks came and lived with me for a long time and watched us do it. It's really the Brigham City model, or the model we developed at that point. Then, even though you won't think of Centerville as being a rural city, it was because of population, and it had something like 17% already built for RUS. And we went and did the same thing here. Established a business model and built out Centerville. So by doing all of this here, I was able to maintain a cash flow, but more importantly was able to build a business model through all of this that gave me a certainty as to things like churn rates, demand, if this, then that. If we invested this kind of money, then we would get that. So I'm gonna go over this here.
You can
So-
slide it over.
So I knew if I invested a certain amount of money, I basically knew what my return on investment would be. So you had Utopia at the time with this debt, and nobody wanted anything to do with Utopia because it was so indebted. But people, I would go to city council meetings and they would say, people would say it, city council members would say it, they get up and say Utopia, it's anything but Utopia. First time I met with our governor, he said it's the most damnable, hellacious experience I've ever had. And that was what I was dealing with. But I knew that business model was developing then. But I also knew that nobody was going to work with Utopia. So I formed another organization, another interlocal called UIA. UIA was done in a very similar manner with weighted votes. And all the pledging members of Utopia pretty much were also pledging members, pledging meaning that they had pledged taxpayer dollars as a backstop. Now, Utopia had told all their citizens that we will never hit your tax pledges. That will never happen. This is Utopia. But they did, indeed, were going to hit their tax pledges. And we needed to go forward. So on the way to work, I just thought of the name because I needed this to be innocuous. And so it was Utah Infrastructure Agency. I needed it to be as whatever. And then what I asked for was $67 million, double down to put money into here. And then we would fund the net revenues back here to pay back bad debt over time, knowing that we're going to hit those things. They in fact did provide me with that money. And on a 5-year plan, to get them to net revenue positive situation, we only missed our projections by 2 weeks. So that was a big deal.
When you say they provided me the money, you did the state of Utah or?
So because of the cities that already pledged their tax pledge dollars, they couldn't do that anymore. And so I had to have some other way to backstop it, and I backstopped it with franchise fees. So the cities, the same cities, Layton, West Valley, Tremont, Murray, Midvale, Orem, they didn't really have a lot of options because if they were going to hit those just keep in mind that a city the size of Layton, it was going to be $3 to $5 million a year for a dead horse. And so can you imagine, relatively how bad that would have been for the city, and it would have bankrupted you. I mean, your tax, you would have had, your property taxes, it would have just been, and in the state of Utah, you can't actually go bankrupt. So you would have had to find that money. And the bond payers, the bondholders, which I think were Bank of America and Key Bank, would have exacted their toll. So they really were in a bad situation here. And by being able to do this, and by putting this organization in place, able to show that model would work. And within 5 years of doing it, within 2 weeks, we had them at break even. So this is an important part. This is a really important part to understand the models and the story. People all the way along throughout the country used a lot of this modeling and do today, and the things we're going to talk about for you guys specifically as the backdrop for how to be successful in both worst and best practices in fiber optics. So I'm going to erase that.
Right here, this little disc.
Oh, okay, good luck. Usually I can put it on one whiteboard, but
You're drawing big.
I'm drawing big. So the Utopia models that you hear today, and I don't know how much they've approached you on it. And part of the reason that I'm meeting with cities is I feel a little bit bad about that because the idea was to go to other cities, right? To go to other cities and put fiber optics in there and funnel that money back to UIA, which would then come back to pay debt. So when they approach you from UIA and Utopia. Basically, it's my model. And that's what I was paid back then. I was a paid mercenary to go find ways to get this fiber optics and get these cities back in a better situation. The problem is that you don't have, that in that model, you don't have ownership or control, and you have no part of the net revenues. I have no idea why cities like Far West, Clearfield, Morgan, some that have joined now, you're basically saying, okay, if I join Utopia or UIA, basically, we're committing, because, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but you're committing that as this network is successful, and it will be now, we know that they will be successful networks if they're deployed correctly. We know that those net revenues, basically your citizens' dollars are going back to Layton to pay back their bad debt. And so I just don't think a lot of times councils and mayors and elected officials, I think that UIA and Utopia, it's a fantastic network. I love the Utopia network. It's my network. I love the people there. Most of the staff's still my people. But I don't think that I think because this is becoming such an increasing and a big issue and it's something that has to be addressed, that I just don't think that most city councils are aware of the options that are available to them. So just for a moment,
So who do you represent right now? I'm a little confused. Why are you here? I mean, it looks like a big pyramid scheme to me, honestly.
Well,
you're not representing Utopia right today, are you?
So I do help. There are times, even over the last few years, that I've consulted and helped cities. I'm not here to do that for you. I'm here very genuinely as an expert to give you some advice. What I'll give you today, I told Dave and Ann before you came in, is cities will pay a lot of money to get a feasibility study and to get a basis for what I'm going to give you today. I represent no one. I have no agenda. I'm not looking to be hired. I'm not looking for any money.
Are you an independent consultant? Is that what you do, or who?
Well, I try not to.
Well, what company do you work for? I'm just curious.
I work for a company called Extreme Upland. It's up on the hunting magazine that I put together, and I like to pheasant hunt, and I like to trucker hunt, and I like to do other things. But I do get pulled back into this often because I am considered, I would, not in any braggadocious way, but I would suggest probably one of the top, if not the top, municipal broadband experts in the country. And I am familiar, by the time we get done today, I'm going to give you a number of options that you guys, because every city is different on how you approach it. But when we get done today, you're going to have a lot better idea of the lay of the land and of some of the options that you have available to you. And I do act as, I sit on several committees when I have time, and I'm here on a Saturday morning when I should be up pheasant hunting. So I really am here, just believe it or not, with no alternative agenda. I do consult sometimes with larger telecoms and different things, and again, some of the national organizations, but I'm here because, so let me tell you why I'm here too. And believe it or not, but this is almost like a religion to me. And this is why. Having been involved with telecommunications since the early 90s, I believe that and I think this is half of the story this morning. When we would have gathered like this a little over 100 years ago, we would have been talking about a different infrastructure. It would have been electricity. I have I need to find it and bring it with me when I come. I keep saying that, but there was a famous court case, I think it was in Washington State, where I thought was really interesting, the result. And they came out with their finding, or their feasibility study about electricity. And they said, this is a wonderful technology, but it's a luxury for the wealthy. We have enough coal, kerosene, and well oil for our lighting needs. Well, because that's what they thought. They thought that electricity was about lights. And today, when I sit here in your chamber rooms, we have lights. And so it is about lights. But we know today that electrical infrastructure is about everything in our lives, from our portable cell phones, electrical motors, sewer systems, SCADA, everything that we have is electrical grid infrastructure. And that infrastructure has grown over time to encapsulate everything that we do, to really everything we have. And so when we talk about fiber today, and when we're talking about broadband, most people think that we're here talking about internet. If I was here just to teach you how to get faster internet, we could do different things. Internet is very analogous to lights and electricity, as internet is to broadband. In fact, I was listening on the way up last night through the snowstorm, and today a little bit on some more analysis. But if you think about with the printing press, and this is where sometimes city councils kind of get sideways, so I'm going to be careful. But when you had the printing press, we got the Bible. You printed other documents, and that was a big advent in civilization. But it also came with negatives. You have the manifesto, and you have Mein Kampf. You have a lot of negatives that came with that too, right? When the internet came about in the early 90s, I remember meeting with the city one time. They said the only reason to have faster internet is to watch porn quicker. And that's how people saw it. But we know today our lives, we can't escape the fact that we're a connected society. And what's coming though down the pike is significantly more than internet. When we talk in 10 years, the internet's going to start to become significantly less important. And I know that we talk about the Internet of Things, but it really is the connection of things. Technology like artificial intelligences and sensory things will add value and quality of life, things that we haven't even imagined. And what basically fiber is, say you have a fiber line here, it's infinite in how many different spectrums come through there. The internet is just this little one right there. It's just that little one. And it runs with certain protocols and it goes over the World Wide Web. But in reality, our worlds are going to change by these other connections. You would think of them more in terms of a virtual private network or VPN, but in reality, they're going to be connectivity mediums that are working with technologies that are coming at us like a freight train. Artificial intelligences that will now, when we go places, will affect our lives for good and bad. But and so that's why I say sometimes city councils get all worried because maybe we're bringing on the bad. But for example, to give you a real life municipal example, the state is struggling with how we're going to do secondary water. I don't know how you do secondary water here, but we're using all of our resources. And so the state's saying cities are going to be mandated to have to start monitoring their water, their secondary water. But so if you had, for example, a fiber optic system to start giving you an idea of things that this will do, if this is Dave's house over here in his big garage and that's his yard, these sensory networks would go throughout the yard and they would know where he has his rose bushes, where he has all of his stuff. And there'd be a guy over here in his garage watching a monitor, and he's running a business. He's watching this monitor and he's watching Dave's yard. This yard knows the time of year, the elevation, and humidity of the soils. That's important for Dave. So everything's underground. Dave's probably using only 20% of what he normally used before, maybe less. And so that means we freed up 80% of that water and that resource. So he's saving a significant amount of money. His lawn's greener, better, and we have significantly more resources. The same thing could be said for the particulates along, whether you're a global warming person or you're not. I won't tell you where I come in. Again, politics. But the state is quickly working with self-driving automobiles. The fact that we have people that are driving up and down all the time in diesel trucks, one person, is silly when you could just simply walk out the door and be in an environment where you could do your work, relax, whatever, and get to Provo or Salt Lake for less money, quicker, and safer. And the state's working on the fact that you can get in these and move there at 3 feet, at 85 miles an hour, 3 feet behind the other cars. These things are approaching us quickly. Artificial intelligences that will give us better quality of life. We'll start wearing in our garments sensories that will know glucose levels, and we'll know our EKGs. We'll know our basic health. We'll know COVID. We'll know if we've contracted a virus. These things sound like the Jetsons, but they are really actually available now. Fall floors that tell us how elderly fall. And so the ability for people as they age to not have to go into old folks' homes anymore, I guess they don't call them that, but be able to live within their homes because we know their temperatures, we know if they're okay. We just know it because of the sensory things. Chattanooga, for example, which they have their own power, but they save $47 million a year by having a fiber optic system. You have your SCADA, the way your city runs, the emergencies, and we've seen with just now the COVID and just how it's changed our lives in just 5 or 6 months. I'm sure that's why you're getting a lot more calls. So I'll get off the soapbox here and go back to the model. But when we talk about putting broadband in your community, we're not talking about just getting faster internet. You have to start understanding that this infrastructure is a critical infrastructure. And it is something that cities need to be putting in place because it's going to be significantly more than just for the internet. So I'm going to move on, but if you have any questions about that, I can answer it before I do. And by the way, I just went into a little bit of it, but so the questions that you'll be asked as you approach this is, because we're a very political or conservative political state, or why should the city have any involvement in something that's the private sector? And so we're going to tackle that first. I would first of all suggest to you that Comcast, CenturyLink have been given rights of ways and easements and all these kinds of things that came after the divestiture and probably are the most subsidized government utilities in the history. But outside of that, I know there are other people in your community that are working and putting in fiber, putting in wireless, putting in other forms for internet. And that's going to only increase. But because this is a critical infrastructure for your citizens, I'm going to show you today that I'm going to show you financially here now, that if you were to have fiber optics in your city as a municipal fiber, not only would it not infringe on the private sector, but everybody in your city would be better off from a net welfare. So I'm going to show you that, and then I'll talk to you about the model. When cities approach looking at fiber optics, it's somewhat of a spectrum. We're going to work on this spectrum here. This is do nothing, and this is treat it like a utility. Along that spectrum, there are lots of different models and a lot of different approaches that cities use. We'll talk about some of them today, but as you start narrowing down on what you might do, you are on the spectrum whether you want to be or not. You're either going to do nothing, you're going to do something here, or you're going to do something in between. And typically, cities do this on the spectrum based on two major factors, that they are political, that are risk factors. Political, sure you're right, Dave. Sorry. These two factors, which are political risk and financial risk. Those affect that spectrum. Now, recently, Kaysville, I don't know if you saw, Kaysville had an initiative about fiber. And it failed within a percentage point, within 200 votes of 14,000 votes, the initiative failed. So you could look at that and say, well, look, the city didn't want it. Well, that's not true. Because if you look at the 50, so let's just say it was basically 50% that wanted it. There were, and when they started their survey showed 87% of their city wanted something done. But as they went through one of the most tumultuous political experiences, primarily because they had Kaysville's maybe a lot like Pleasant View, but it's very close knit. People move and live there all their lives. And they have a group in there. I have a guy that was my best friend in my wedding. I don't know if he's my best friend anymore. But as I was helping him with some stuff, he said, I want Kaysville just to be Mayberry. I don't want it to advance. I don't care if we have any internet. And that a lot of people in Kaysville, they don't want economic development. They don't want a lot of this stuff. And so they came out in a strong opposition, tried to do referrals, to refer the process, made it very difficult. You also have the lead lobbyist for CenturyLink lives in Kaysville, Eric Isom, and a lot of other influences that came against them. And anytime you guys know that you go to a ballot initiative, you find that you have, people just vote no, right? It's gonna cost money, debt, vote no. So of the remaining 50%, there's a certain percentage that would have voted yes, had they really been informed, right? But if 50% of your city basically says, we're dying on the vine, you know that there's probably 50% of that 50% that are in the same vein, which is getting closer to what your survey really showed. But when cities look at doing this, they always have this big political risk. And elected officials always tell themselves the same issue. I'm in this because I'm trying to do good for my community. And if I'm here, I can do that. I worked hard to get elected. And if I vote for this darn thing, if I go push this forward, it's likely I'll be ousted. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's not. But I would contend, as we're going into this model aspect now, that if you do nothing because of that, or do something less, then in fact, you're putting your city in worse position, and we're not doing our jobs. I think you have to make your decisions based upon the nature of how critical this infrastructure is for your city. Kaysville's mistake was promising to put it up on ballot, then they pulled it back, then they put it on ballot. In Fort Collins, Colorado, similar, 87% of their citizens said that they wanted it. Comcast spent $1.5 million to fight it in Fort Collins. And Fort Collins, which is a little bit more progressive, not quite as conservative, after the whole fight, won at 56%. If we ran a survey in your community, I don't know if you have, but I'll bet you it would very much come right there. But if you put it to a vote, it's pretty much going to come here, and it's going to divide your city. That's why it's important, and that's why I'm here to help you. And as you do the process, my suggestion would be that you're elected for a reason. And if you decide to do nothing, that's the decision you make. But if you decide to go forward, you do it because that's the best thing for your community. And there are ways that I won't go into today, but I'll talk to you about other times that you could pursue this without having to go through the referendum process and other things. There's ways for you to make those decisions as city leaders. So let's say that you went to a utility model right here. You have 10,000 people. So you have 10,000 people here. You could pay somebody to do a feasibility study for you and to look and see if it will work and the cost. But I'm going to tell you that when it comes back, it's going to come back somewhere around $22 to $30 million. That's what it will cost to put a total ubiquitous system here. And it'll depend, and the differences will be, the reason there's a range is because sometimes you will build it differently for different purposes. It's likely that you'll be closer to 26 million as your actual figure. So if you do that calculation, let's say that you decided tomorrow that Todd's right and we'll do $26 million. We're seeing the bond rate right now somewhere, probably if I said 2.5, that's high, right? But let's just say 2.5. And I looked at a 30-year note. I'm probably, and I always look at it, I know you guys look at it as a yearly or annual fiscal, but I look, your monthly payment is about $128K. So basically $120K a month. And if you were to say, well, everybody here in this city, we're going to treat it as a utility, just like we would any utility, then then it would cost every single person $12 a month. I could put on my hair, sorry. So $12 a month. So that's when people start getting up in arms, because you know that if you raise a fee $1.30, people lose their minds, right?
That's not households though, that's total residents.
It's total residents, total addresses.
So I have a question while you're getting a drink there. Right now you're explaining the model of how the difference in the cost and stuff, and how the cities would go about doing making it a utility, a fee on your on your.
Right. I'm approaching it right here for the moment. Yes.
Okay, and so my question to you is what if that's something that the council and the city decides that, like secondary water, that's a choice. You don't have to have secondary water, but things like that. So is it because companies won't come into the cities unless they have a guarantee to pay for the infrastructure, or how do you get companies to come in or to provide that fiber without the city subsidizing it?
Okay, so I'm going to get to that. If you don't mind, I'm going to get to that in just a moment along this spectrum, because that's a great question that is being asked a lot right now by a lot of both bigger and smaller cities, is how does the city not go into debt or get financially involved yet attract companies to come in and maybe do this? So I'm going to approach that with you, but let me finish out the utility and I'll come there. Is that okay, Miss Curry?
Sarah. No, it's fine. I just.
No, it's a question everybody wants to know. If you charge $12 a month, would it surprise you to know that every single person in your community would be better off? Consumers are better off, because the way you would build the fiber optics would be to do what they call, because cities, it may also surprise you that the most successful utility or fiber utility in the country is actually in Utah. Does anybody think they know where it is? In Spanish Fork. And why? Because back in 2001, when Utopia and iProvo and all others were looking at doing this, and they were approaching this, Spanish Fork was ahead a little bit, and they went to the bond. They got their bond and they committed. Then the state legislature put in what's called they call it the retail provision, meaning that cities couldn't provide the internet or the end-to-end. Politically, I agree with that. I don't think I don't believe government should be involved doing what the private sector should do. I think I agree with that, but it did hurt Utopia. It did hurt iProvo, and it did hurt other entities that were doing the Spanish Fork today, though. They'll hide it, but they'll tell you if you call down there. In fact, they'll try to say that they'll do this for you. I would say that's an option, but there are probably other better options. But Spanish Fork paves their streets in gold and chandeliers I'm being hyperbolic, right? But Spanish Fork makes, at times, I think they've been as high as 87% take rate, certainly in the mid-70s. And people love living in Spanish Fork and having this broadband and with the cable stuff, and it's really very successful. And they have a lot of net revenues that they put into a lot of other projects in Spanish Fork because they were grandfathered into that.
So they're the internet provider.
They're everything.
They're everything.
Yeah. But like Utopia is called open access, meaning that you provide all the roads, that you provide, like very similar to what you do with roads and streets now. You provide streets, roads, and UPS and Domino's and everybody else, Uber and trucks. Everybody else can use it. And trucks, they can use your access, but you're not providing. You're not doing the shipping company. You're not doing all the other things. So open access is allowing other companies to do the retail end of it, but you're providing the basis because this is infrastructure. So by doing that, consumers benefit because they have competition and better service. As you know, right now, Comcast, I have a gig connection. So they've promised me 1,000-lane freeway at my house up in Logan. But we all work from home now. And then people start getting, the problem is it's aggregated, meaning it's shared technologies. And you get all this traffic going across, back and forth. And it's, even though I have up to a 1 gig and it works great at 2 in the morning, the reason it sometimes doesn't work and the reason it's going to continue more problematic is because you try to get so much traffic. So what Utopia does, or other similar networks, is the infrastructure that you're putting in place is actually like putting a 1,000-lane freeway going both directions and only you use it. And so that's the difference. What's important about that is not just the traffic for the internet, but also the fact that sensory applications and other things coming down, they can't have latency issues. And so we need millisecond delivery, guaranteed delivery to do much of this. So sometimes it's not just a matter of how big the pipe is or how fast it is, but how it's constructed so that you can get life-saving technologies up and down there. So the first group that benefits by having this as a utility are consumers. They'll either save money or get better service, et cetera. The next group are those that stay with Comcast. When I put these in place before, oftentimes Comcast will come in with like a $29 deal or whatever. But it will compensate because they will say, hey, why go with that? You know, they have, now they're having to compete. So citizens here benefit because they get better private services. Of course, your businesses benefit because businesses need not just better service and competition, but they also need redundancy. And so by having another route out, even if it was their backup line, that makes a big difference. How about indigents or elderly? How does that possibly help elderly people? By law, if you were to build this or by statute, if you were to build this internet to an elderly person's home or to anybody's home, so you have a line going in, you would have to provide some kind of base level service as part of doing it as a utility. You want to do that anyway because you want to have the ability to have access, all right, to the different things. But by doing that, this base level is probably as good as they're receiving right now or better, and they're paying maybe $20, upwards of $40. So now with the $12 base fee, they save that money. So they're better off. People that can't afford it or don't use the internet, cities generally have a ratio of what, 2 to 3%. And then finally, the city benefits because it can use it to save money in essential services up and down. So in reality, if you put this in as a utility, every single person, there's one minor exception, but when every single citizen in Pleasant View would be better off if you did it. The exception are communities that may have already put their own system in or have contracts having done so. And in those instances, that would then be added on, but cities can allow for that. So, Sarah, can I call you Sarah? Or Miss Erie? Okay. So I said along this line, I told you about in Brigham City, we did what was called an SAA, or a voluntary place. So rather than requiring this as a utility, you allow basically people to opt in. There's also a scenario where they can opt out. There's different models. And so basically, you know your demand. You already know, based on much of the data, that it will be 50 to 70% of your citizens that would want to use this. Just that's what you're seeing. Okay, so when you start talking about that, that also brings up, and I don't think cities should do it for this reason, but it also brings up net positive revenues. And I know with enterprise funds and stuff like that, because it's more difficult, but you can pay off. There are ways to use that to work with other city functions that are inherently working with fiber.
So you're saying 50 to 70% want to use or would likely want to opt in, but the Spanish Fork, for example, if you survey there, you think that
Well, their actual usage is ranged from 75 to 87%.
that's Spanish Fork usage. Yeah.
And then we see across the country that typically you'll reach that 50+%. And getting those take rates is a trick too. But So there's different options. There's other options to do it based on contract. There's things you can do, but there's all kinds of models along this line. But to Sarah's point, now, a lot of cities will say, okay, that's fine and dandy, but there's still 26 million. That's still dead. And oftentimes people will come in with scare tactics and say, well, what if this becomes an obsolete technology? We're still working with copper, by the way, that was put in back in the 30s and 40s. Fiber optics has not seen this extent, but they're saying, okay, well, we've got satellite, we've got these other wireless. What about 5G? 5G simply means fifth generation wireless technology. To make it work so it would actually be like the internet, you'd have to be about 300 yards between towers. There are health concerns associated with that. So the way the cellular companies put it in place is they put it at about 1,700, and they use it for cellular internet. It's a whole different thing, a whole different ballgame, but it still has to tie to a fiber optic immediately at every tower. So fiber optics are still essential, whether it's 5G down to 10G. It won't really matter. We have to have this fiber optic infrastructure. It won't become obsolete. This is definitely a 30 to 50 year technology. We could go into that more. I'm just trying to answer questions.
Is there already who owns the fiber main highway through Utah? I mean, where does it start and end kind of thing?
Well, there is no such company, but probably one of the largest and best run fiber optic entities in the country is actually UDOT. UDOT has done it. I mean, Lynn Yoakum, I call her the fiber queen. She's phenomenal, and the state's been very forward looking. And so as these anytime there's an open line or open transit, they're putting in fiber. And oftentimes companies will trade out. There's companies like Syringa, Utopia, there's CenturyLink. CenturyLink actually is going away. They won't tell you this, but they just got bought out, or they bought out. I guess L3 bought them out. And so they're now actually going out of the game, and they're just trying to milk this as they go out. Comcast is coming in, but again, it's aggregated technology with limitations, and it's not really working towards what you need. And so it's just not about faster internet. So there's a whole bunch of main trunk lines that come in and out. Some of them owned by
who's maintaining
the various entities.
Are maintaining themselves. Okay.
Yeah, there's probably hundreds of them. Zayo, there's a ton of them that come in through here. So when you look at the $26 million of debt, to Sarah's point, what if we don't want to become involved? So there are ways to consider this. We've shown that if you treat this like a utility, the very best way, I'm just going to say, to do this, I know that this seems overwhelming and that cities don't typically have core competency when it comes to fiber optics, as was evidenced this morning with our technical problems right on the internet. But in reality, where it's come in the last decade, when Utopia, I got Utopia in 2008, there were so many issues with the network that we had to revamp. And Utopia is still very much a manually driven system because of the hodgepodge way we had put together. But the way fiber optic systems are today is they're very modular. They could actually be run by a very simple IT type department because of the way the technologies work. The very best option would be for a city to do this themselves, and to run it themselves would require very few FTEs. And even in that case, you would be, but then to get to that point, you need to know somebody that can put it and set it up right? Well, you know Todd. So here I am. You can hire me, and I'll come down and I'll run it and I'll put it in place for you, and everything will be good. But here's the problem. I'm coming down Sardine Canyon one day, I see a pheasant, you never see me again because I go off a ditch or I die or something happens. And so that's not a good option because you can't rely on one person. You can't even rely on really one company. It'd have to be something where you garnered that experience in-house, and the likelihood with turnover and political and otherwise, I understood you just lost a city manager. That kind of thing is disruptive in that flow, and where people are relying on this for a lot of things, it's probably not the best way. So the next best way would be to go to another interlocal We tried to put one up in place for Kaysville and American Fork last year, but because of the political stuff, but this could be done in a way that would be very successful and have it run that way. That'd be another good way. The other way would be, to Sarah's point, to form a relationship with a private entity and then do a private-public partnership. In doing this, as the next best option, you are losing net revenue because they have to be paid. And so the best way is, if you wanted money and you wanted to experience what Spanish Fork does all the time, you need to pay somebody, or you need to hire something, and you need to have it run, because the model looks very much like this. I don't care where you go, it always works out something like this. Again, this is information that, but let's say that if you could get a gig for, I don't know, in the 60s, that'd be a pretty good rate, right? When that all filters down through your refresh, to your ops, to your payments for cap, X,
What do you mean, what do you mean by 60s?
$60 for a gig,
Gotcha, okay.
for amazing connectivity,
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
So when that all filters down, there's gonna be right around $15, give or take, of revenues that are available, depending on how it's put together. And that's just simply how it is. Those are the financials. And we've done this a million different ways, but if you reduce the cost, you lose some here. And that's the money, at the end of the day, that Utopia is trying to take, or UIA, from Pleasant View and put back into the system of Utopia and pay back down the debts. But if you were to look at, say, 5,000 addresses, what would that be? About 800,000 a year in net revenues. Maybe more. And so basically, that's what the city's giving up. What is it, Dave?
I'm not sure what I'm doing here.
So go 5,000, let's say you take 50% of Pleasant View, 5,000 addresses, and at $15 a month. On an annual basis, it would be how much money?
900,000.
So $900,000 is what you have to work with, Sarah, when it comes to attracting this. And so a lot of cities are saying, well, we want a share of this if we do this. Okay, we want a part in this. And keep in mind, if you get to 60 or 70%, that only increases, right? And so if you guys could experience $1 million more a year into your coffers, into your water systems, into all that kind of thing. And I get that there's enterprise stuff that you have to worry about. That's a different conversation. That wouldn't be a small amount of money.
That 900,000 goes towards the ROI, right? I mean, that's the.
It should go towards paying off your debt quicker.
Yeah.
And the way the state's set up, it's stricter, that money should stay within that enterprise. But it could be handled different ways. Once you could pay off a system like this, and if everybody got on board, 8 and 15 years, right? And once it's paid off, then you could use that money to reduce that and have $30 gig internet, for example. So, or that could be used for secondary water sources, do the AMR. Is that what you call it? Automatic meter reading, AMR or SCADA systems, because it works in conjunction with that. So oftentimes people come in with best intentions and they use it otherwise, but regardless, that's a lot of net revenue that's available. That's how, Sarah, you could possibly attract this. But here's the problem. That's still not enough money at $900,000. The ROI on that on 26 million is still what? Even if you're paying, because you're paying in this right here, you're paying part of your principal at some point. So even if you're very successful, that's still what, a 15 plus year ROI. And that's why cities are having to consider this, and why private entities aren't really getting involved, except for their cherry picking at times. Because these are simply the numbers. That's how much it costs. Now, you can do it less by just drilling stuff in and putting things in place, and depends on how robust or what. But this is, so when Sarah asks, why can't we get somebody to come in and do this? You can. And that's probably a really good option. But those are the financials. So I'm almost done with this whiteboard, and we can ask questions. So whatever you look at, so the number one thing you're looking at, do we do nothing? Do we do this? Do we do something in between? And then when we do that, do we do that ourselves? Do we have a company run it for us? Or do we do a PPP? Now, one last thing here, oftentimes when you're looking at this, cities want to run out and do an RFI or an RFP. While those aren't inherently bad, those are sometimes will limit your ability to get what you need.
What are those?
So request for information or request for proposal.
But there's also laws and legality of the requirements that you have to do that. If you're, that's my understanding too, but I guess some of the, maybe it's for a later discussion, but some of the questions and concerns that I would have of, deciding whether or not this is an essential utility to put on it, a city bill would be everyone's interpretation of what is essential versus not. Do you know what I mean? Of being able to justify saying, okay, now everyone, I guess you would have to get kind of the general feel of what the public would want, like recycling and things like that, of deciding if that's going to be added to your bill, whether you opt in or not. Does that make sense?
It does. I would simply suggest, Sarah, that question's already been answered just by where we are today, where we're going. It is essential. What fiber could do.
Yeah, but I guess I would disagree a little bit of whether or not the city is required to provide that for you, though. That's where we would differ.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's the decision you guys are trying to come to, is do you grapple with that? But I think the fact of where technology is headed, where we are today, I didn't even know, because I was going to tell you how good a church member I am lately, but I didn't even know that they were Zooming meetings lately and doing that differently. I know I should be, but there is hunting, and so, but just not that, just the ability what your city could do with all this. So it is critical infrastructure, but Sarah's right. Is it critical that the city do it? And the only people who can make that decision are the people here. So, but when you talk about doing RFIs, Sarah, or RFPs, you're right, the state requires that, but there are other methods. Number one is because Utopia, for example, is a quasi state agency. They have to act exactly like that. So any pricing that Utopia has received is public information and is pricing that you can take advantage of without ever going to an RFP. Did you know that? Yeah. And so and that's across the board. So if there's other projects ever that you want to do, you should go look at other entities that have done it, and you can actually go to that entity and get the exact same pricing if they're also a state agency. So that's one. The other thing is that there are things that are called unsolicited proposals. And so if, you're talking about this enough, like Roger Timmerman, the guy I hired and brought on Utopia, is now leading Utopia. He'll hear about this meeting or what you're doing. He'll come charging in and tell you why Utopia and UIA is fantastic, and he'll give you an unsolicited proposal. There might be others that will come to you and give you an unsolicited proposal. When you get an unsolicited proposal, reason that might be better than an RFP. For example, Kaysville did an RFP, but they only got 4 basic applicants. The RFP was written in a way that I think it was problematic, and those 4 applicants may not have been the best choice for them, but now they're stuck because you can't go outside of that process once you establish that RFP. So, but if you got an unsolicited proposal, there is no requirement for you to even consider it. You can look at it, you could read through it, and you could say, yeah, this is bunk. Or you could say, I like a few things in here, and you could call the company back and say, hey, would you do a further analysis based upon, here's, Sarah and Dave and Mayor decided they want to do this way, but can you give us an analysis like this and give us more detailed information? And now that company can provide that for you as they're working down that track. But you could still just say, we forget it. We decided not to. So to me, that's a lot better procedural way to do it, oftentimes, than just through an RFI. Sometimes the RFI or RFPs are better once you're getting into the process if you want to try to better your pricing and get certain conditions. That's my opinion. So again, back to what Sarah was saying, you're trying to talk a company into coming in to Pleasant View and having a significantly longer ROI than what they're used to doing. So when you're considering where along this spectrum, because you will be on that spectrum no matter what that you go, and you want to attract that, you have to understand that that's just simply the ROI. And you'll have a lot of smaller companies that will come in. I know a few in the area that will come in and make proposals, but this is an infrastructure for the ages. It's like building roads. It has to be done the right way. I am familiar with some companies that would probably be interested in communities like yours that may come in and provide an unsolicited proposal. I can't speak for them, but if they were aware that there was where you were along this spectrum, which we can talk more about when you want, but they may be willing to come in and do that. And so I'm almost on the last thing, and I'll sit down and ask any questions. But that's why, Sarah. Does that make sense? A little bit. Why?
Yes.
Why?
It does. I can. What you're saying, it makes sense. The difference between the two. I guess it's a matter of personal philosophy.
Yeah, and how you approach it. Yeah.
Yes, and what is the best way to approach it as a city?
And again, that's where you guys will be here, right? Every city does it different. And if you were to ask me exactly how to do it and outline it today, I would tell you a way, but I don't have to deal with the political or financial factors, right? I can go back and hunt pheasants up in Logan today, and I don't have to deal with the consequences there. So if it were me, though, and however I did this, here's the things I would want to make sure. I want to make sure of ownership or control. I want some return on my investment in some way. And then I would want it, of course, built correctly. The way it's built is a big deal. Those three things you have to make sure. And the problem with both these under the model I put in place for Utopia and UIA is that you don't get either of those. You do get this. And then lastly, again, to Sarah's thing, when you're looking at working with a PPP, there are different ways to structure it. The city, if you can see this, okay, the city can bond and they can backstop that with sales, with franchise sales and use, whatever. They can do that, right? Or you could say to that company, we'll bond, but we want company X to be the first position on the cosigner, and then the city will be the second. So you could do that. So if you had the right company that would be willing to work with these, bond folks and the money holders, right? If you did that, then if they had good enough collateral as a cosigner on your car, then you may not, then you may feel a lot more comfortable there. Or you could say, tell you what, we'll bond as a city, but we want to use that company as the backstop. Why would you do that, by the way? Why would an entity be willing to backstop but still have you bond. Why would that be good? Because you're getting like a 2.3 or lower right now on your bond rate. They're probably at 6 to 9 points on their money. So if they can keep their money or keep it even just in their pockets, they're making money on their points and using you as a city bondholder to do it. And that also helps your citizens because that creates more margins in the model and creates the ability for the city to move through quicker. And then fourth,
They
the last,
still have ownership though, a city still has ownership, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Lastly, the money could just simply come from the PPP to the city if you can find that. It could become, you know, that city's their partner, they expedite it, they do all the different things that you'd want to do, all the things that we talked about. But now for the city to expect a return on investment or, you know, different ownerships, different things that comes into play. I do know an entity that might be willing to do this and give the city ownership after it's paid off and part of the return on investment after that point. But if you went this route, obviously you've got to get that company to an ROI quicker. So those are the 4 routes, Sarah. One, again, city just bonds it, does it themselves, or works with the PPP. The second is that they put the city as the secondary cosigner. Third is that the PPP is the primary cosigner and the city doesn't have a financial. To me, that's a really good option. By the way, you have debt, the city has that debt, but the financial institutions don't have recourse to come after the city for the money, but yet you're borrowing it through those municipal ways. Or fourth is that the PPP is the only route, or the PPP puts the money in and gets forth. So I kind of fire hosed you a bit, and I can be available for whatever questions in terms of. That's probably just a little bit of it. Sorry, it's a lot of it, but what questions do you have?
Well, this is the mayor. I have a ton of them, but I guess the basic ones would be, we talk a lot about ROI, but what about loss? I mean, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, well, we're structuring that, our fees as the city, so that there is an ROI. But if we want that to be kind of either net neutral or whatever, we would just charge our citizens a lower fee. But then, I mean, right?
You mean, you mean like a loss leader, or you mean would you basically the city would subsidize it in some way?
Well, not subsidize it, but break even. So if we structure it with the PPP, then they're going to want a ROI. So we're going to set a rate. So we're charging our citizens more money so that they can get a return on their investment. And who sets that? Is that just negotiated with the time we established the PPE, or that you are guaranteed an X amount of ROI, or?
Yeah, I think in part there's that upfront contractual relationship, but I think that's in great part determined by the elasticity of the market. My greatest fear, people never really ask this, but my greatest worry about these models always comes down to elasticity. We've not seen broadband go like this and decline. It's generally rising, or it's, you know, because of the cost of it. But I think there could be technologies down the road that where an entity might include it, and therefore could leave the city in a position where, you know, that price elasticity needs to be higher than it could be realized. But I don't think that that's likely. So to your point, yeah, that price model it's not necessarily set in stone because there is a range. For example, even on the Utopia deal, there's somebody I think that's providing internet at $10, and there's others that are providing it at 20. Now, it's not, of course, you have all the other fees involved, but the difference is between like 55 and 65, or 65 and $75 at the end. So there is still price differential in the model. But yes, you do, what you would establish with the PPP is not so much, because keep in mind, you would have to run a regulated side and a non-regulated side. So if you were working with a PPP, the pricing that you would set in place is the operational pricing, the refreshing of the system that's escrowed, and so forth. But you're not really establishing the retail pricing. That's more established by the market, right? And there's basically a range there. So if the PPP wanted to provide end services, then my suggestion would be that they just have to operate on the same playing field as all other providers do. And so you wouldn't necessarily set what they would provide as their retail rate. In fact, I don't think you can do that legally.
Which is a perfect segue into my second question. Second question has to do with total utility on that far end of the, spectrum there, where it's a total utility. It's not PPP. It's the city's running this utility.
Which, by the way, you could do as a PPP, but
because then it gets to, okay, who does the in-home service? Are we just providing a pipe and they're still going out and getting a third party, if you will, or a private to come in and put in routers and gateways and so on and so forth? Or is that, if it's the total utility system, is the city doing that?
again, that's just something you would determine as you go into it, how much the city wants to be involved. If the city's going to go with a PPP, then I would suggest that you contract with them under certain service level agreements. It says, here's our expectations in terms of time up, any downtime, how responsive we want you to be to our citizens, what kind of customer service ratings we want to get, all that kind of thing. Now that affects your model because, but you would set those all up front, and then you would generally liaison somebody from your staff who would watch dashboarding of those different elements. And then they would, of course, would be reporting to the city council generally on a weekly basis in terms of just a dashboard that you could be viewing. Some cities might require a monthly update at your council meetings, occasional work sessions, or sometimes it can get to be where it's like a quarterly thing. So those expectations are set up front.
Mayor, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead, Steve.
And I want to back up just a little bit because I'm just really confused here because, everybody in the city, I would think, has some access to internet. I don't think anybody can't get internet if they don't want it. It's the quality. And you talked about the internet, getting onto the internet, and that means a lot of things. This Zoom, this has nothing to do with the internet, but this is a communication stream we have going here that's necessary. My wife works at Weber State, and she has to have, a certain speed to do her Zoom meetings and different things that she has to do. So we as a city, we're looking, and I have people all the time ask me, I wish we could just get something to standard because we've got all these different options back and forth. And so when I look at this, I look at, it's kind of like healthcare. I'm going off on a little tangent here for just a second, but everybody wants healthcare. Everybody thinks they deserve healthcare, yet it's kind of like you talked about the very first thing here. We're robbing people, that are less, the younger generation to pay for the old. It's kind of this pyramid scheme in healthcare. It's a pyramid scheme in this thing, we'd be paying to pay off the bills if we did the utopia, kind of like you said there. And it's so confusing because where do we end? Because if we have water pipes, we have our Pleasant View water system. We furnish it. If someone else wants to come in and start pumping water into our pipes, where do we how can we do that better, or someone else can do that better if we have all the infrastructure? So it just seems like it's just overwhelming as to which way to go. Because everybody has a system right now. Comcast, CenturyLink, TXOX, or whoever else is furnishing internet at this point. Do we then just reinvent that again if we put all the pipes in, if we do 26 million, and we have the whole city in fiber optics, you know,
Do you still, is your question, do you still have access to what you want, or do you
well,
have?
but it just seems like we're doing something that's already halfway in place. I mean, there's a lot of places in the city already that have fiber optic stuff, you know, and so how do we discount that? Because I mean, this TXOX, that's a local company here. They are in the process right now, some of the subdivisions putting fiber optic in. So if we come in with the city system, does that negate their system? I don't know how
How does that work?
Or all or nothing. Yeah. I mean, how do we put in a complete new system like our water system? I mean, we have pipes, you know, Tyson has pipes going to every house in the city pretty much. We do share a little bit with another company on another side of the tracks, but we've kind of been talking around it a little bit, and I've been talking even on my conversation here, I'm talking around it, but I just don't feel, I'm still very lost in the process.
Well, I think that's not always a bad place to be, you know, Steve, is because you find your way out. I would say that where it comes to like a company like TXOX, that might be a really good factor for the city to you know, I could certainly talk with them and see what they're doing, and because there is a difference in a mom and pop or smaller entity, even if they tell you great things versus maybe something that's a little bit with broader breadth. But at TXOX, I've seen sometimes where a local company like that can facilitate a relationship with, you know, maybe another company and the city. So maybe the work that they've already done could be incorporated. It could be an acquisition for the city or the city system. It could be.
But is that something that the city? I know you talk about. I mean, roads. That's one reason the city has roads, is because if everybody had their own private road, it just wouldn't work. That's why we have a water system, you know, because if everybody had their own separate well, it just wouldn't work. We have to come together, and this is the decision we have to make. Is this something we want to do as a city? I mean, obviously, that's what we talked about. You know, but Questar Gas, they tried to deregulate that a little while ago, where Questar still has all the lines, but then people are feeding their own gas into the system, you know, and individually billing. That just seems nonsense to me. You know, how can someone else do it cheaper than Questar, because they've got all the infrastructure in, and the, you know, wherever the spigot is, put natural gas in. How can they have cheaper gas coming to my house? So
yeah, I think that
just doesn't work that way.
I think it's not exactly analogous, but I would say two things. I think a similar thing that comes to mind is American Fork. They tried to do their own system, got sold a bill of goods on, really, it was a hybrid deal. But nevertheless, the city ended up selling that to a company. They call themselves AF Connect. AF Connect sounds like American Fork, but it's really American Fiber, but they were clever in how they did it. AF Connect today has, I think, well, I don't know if I can tell how many they have. I might be under non-disclosure, but they have a number of customers, and they supposedly, Steve, they service 95% of the city with fiber. Yet in that city, 87% in a recent survey said that they needed another option. And that's because many of the AF Connect customers aren't getting the service that they need, either in terms of customer service or quality of delivery. So that's number one. And so you might have a company here that has things. I would suggest that sometimes that's while it's a consideration, it's their, you know, quality makes a difference. The other thing is that keep in mind, this isn't just for internet. If the city has this infrastructure in place, it's not like it's not as commodity as maybe gas lines or water, which is the same thing. The way that fiber optics can be split up in terms of the waves and the connectivity in there is significantly different and ultimately more progressive in working with every city function. So it would be much more analogous to electricity. But, but even then it's more advanced because of the way it needs to work. I would suggest that if the city were to deploy a fully fiber optic system, you would find ways to be much more efficient and save money. And the result is that other private entities like TXOX or others could work in conjunction and use that to compete by providing retail services, because the city is not going to provide those retail services. That's being provided by other entities. So I think it's just a lot different of a situation than, say, Questar or some of these other infrastructure. In fact, it's probably dynamically different. And just because you have companies that are focused in your community doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be well served. It also doesn't mean you won't be. And so there might be a conversation to be had with an entity like that. There might be a partnership to be had between the city and a TXOX or a TXOX and another company. And it might be, to Sarah's point, something that might be more fortuitous because they're here. So it would come down to a lot of the details. I think that for me, your number one question is, as a council and as a city, do you feel like fiber optics plays a critical role as infrastructure going forward? Your research, if everything else tells you that, then your next question, once you've asked that, is what's the city's involvement from there? Sorry, Sarah.
I went like that because that ultimately, you laid the groundwork of how things could possibly work and the background behind it. And then it really comes down to, sorry, my kids are talking. Then it comes down to what is the council and the city's personal philosophy. So yes, high-speed internet or internet is deemed an essential utility. What is the city's role in providing that for the residents? Is it the city's role, or what? And if it is, at what level is it the city's role? And then how would you go about it? Or if it's not, is it the city's role, and how do we would want to implement it, and how involved or whatever would the city decide that would be what we needed to provide for residents, instead of them providing it on their own. And you're going to get a wide range of people in here. My husband's been sitting here listening to this conversation, and even he and I differ on this. He's like, you know what? Long time ago, water, streets, public safety, all those things were deemed essential services, and everybody decided we were going to pay into a system with taxes to provide that for the residents. And he's like, for him, internet would not be one of those. He will pay for it on his own. He doesn't want to have to, because like it or not, even when you pay into a system, that limits your options to what the city decides or your representatives decide is going to be provided for you. And, there's pros and cons on both sides. I guess it just comes down to personal philosophy of what the city's role is in providing that essential service for you.
And I think today, with me being here, I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm trying to provide you with a range of ideologies, methodologies, models. And so, I'm not here telling you, if you were asked my opinion, I would tell you how I would do it. But then again, I don't live here, and
I hope I didn't come across as anything but just talking. No, I don't think that you're trying to sway one way or another. Everybody has their own philosophy. And I appreciate finding out more in the information, because I wasn't sure how cities went about it, honestly, of how they provide that service with the utility and the bond and how they would do that. So thank you for that.
Well, as we're approaching 10 o'clock hour, I'd like to thank Dave for kind of setting this up, because that's what it was meant to be. It was information. We're kind of like starting from the ground up, and we haven't even decided our philosophy collectively. This is just more or less a let's hear what's kind of out there, what our options are, so that we together as a council can sit down and have a detailed discussion to answer a lot of these philosophical questions, to see which direction we want to head. So I really appreciate you taking the time, Dave. Thank you for setting it up, and we really appreciate you. Really, seriously, there's a lot of different levels of expertise here. on the council as far as its kind of information from zero to probably nobody's got near the expertise you got, but there's certainly members that have a greater understanding of how it all works. So, but that doesn't take into account the philosophical and the political discussion. So that's where I think we're headed. And information, that's why I told Dave when he asked me about this, information is always good to have so that we can make informed decisions talking about these politics.
Well, Mayor, if I might say, I'd be available to you anytime. You can call me night or day. Just if you don't get me, leave me a message.
Well, Mayor, I hope that this is just the first of many conversations with our new friend and being able to be informed and stuff, because absolutely, I think that this has been very informative. I'm very grateful that Dave, remind me your name again.
Todd?
Todd, our new
His
friend.
last name is Marriott, yeah.
Yeah, I knew the Marriott part. I just couldn't remember the first name. But
I
no.
have all the negatives, bad stories on Dave too. So
Good. Hang out with us more often. Dave's like, there's no negative stories on him. I want to hear about him because the guy's like a Boy Scout. There's no way.
I know, isn't that like so annoying? I know, it's so annoying. But someday we'll find something. I know he can't shoot pheasants as well as me, or sometimes maybe he can. I don't know.
Okay, that's a game changer. You can't
Yeah,
play
it really is that time of year, isn't it? We got the second weekend of November, and
It's all year long for Todd.
Yeah, it pretty much is, yeah.
all right.
Yeah, we have 13 different dogs and 8 different breeds, and
Wow, nice.
but I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was a privilege. Thank you.
Well, again, thanks to Dave and thanks to you, Todd, for taking the time. And that's probably not the best travel down from Logan this morning. I don't know what the roads were like, but
It was fun, yeah.
one last night here knocked our power out, as you know, for about an hour and a half. And sorry for the late start. Bad timing, I guess. Any other questions that are just burning a hole? I think philosophically, council, we need to wait. I'd like to wait to have a more in-depth discussion when we get our new city administrator on board. So it might be a month or 6 weeks or something before we can schedule another work session and kind of talk about the philosophies and some of the ideas that we've talked about here. I think that's critical to have that person involved. Any other questions for Todd?
I have one. Just what's the risk of waiting? I mean, what new technology, or is there if we waited longer, if we push this down the road longer and say, hey, this is going to be an opportunity to put this in a later date, will costs be better? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there is any benefit to that, or it's like, hey, if we say, hey, this is important now, we're going to get a lot more better. We're looking for commercial business right now, and we're trying to. Is that something that attracts them? I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say there's 5 things. Number one is the bond rate right now is very favorable. And so you could get where that's not as favorable, and little differences make a big difference. Secondly, there are resources I think that are available that I know of today we haven't really talked about, but I know they're available that may not be available later because they may have spent that opportunity. I think attracting businesses, having this kind of infrastructure, it's not just to your business or commercial sectors, but I think, getting Weber State folks or JetBlue or those kinds of things, that kind of infrastructure, I think, the work from home, that economic development is critical. So I think the inability to move forward with some of the quality of life issues with telehealth, telemedicine, it'll be delaying that. And I think things will get more expensive because I think demand's going to grow. So cost of electronics may not be an issue, but fiber availability, conduit, and probably the workforce put it in could start creating market forces that would drive up your costs. So I think those are some of the real reasons not to wait a long time. And I do also know of a lot of other Utah cities are looking at doing this. So I think there's a political risk in waiting. I think that you could be seen as, from your constituents, as not doing because of the fear of it, if not, maybe pursuing it. I think you need to have a clear, definitive plan, no matter what you do. So I think no matter what you do, you should do it soon.
That was actually a good point that you just mentioned about, I didn't, as far as economic development and stuff, providing infrastructure for, fiber actually would be a selling point for companies to relocate here as well. So,
All righty. Well, again, appreciate your time, and if there's no other questions, we'll adjourn.
Have a good Saturday, everyone.
Yep,
thank you. Thank you so much for coming down from Cache
Yeah.
Valley, Todd.
really.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Mayor.
Sorry
Steve.
about the late start.
I think it goes without saying.
Hi, Tyson, even though we don't hear you.
Tyson here.
Right?
Bye.
Looks like it's
Tyson,
I think you gotta decide what you do.
come in here, I've got an extra cinnamon roll for you.
Where's
sir.
mine, Dave?
You kick the ball out.
Where's mine?
I might have one too, so.
Yeah, what the heck? You only
I won't
take
eat one.
some.
Then it needs to give some direction to those students. So I don't think you're in a situation where you